The United Nations Secretary General has told the United Nations General Assembly that the world was in an era of epic transformation, facing challenges unlike any we have seen, challenges that demand global solutions. The general debate is underway in New York, with President Cyril Ramaphosa expected to speak in fact, at this hour. António Guterres warning that the world is urging towards an unimaginable power that, of course, risks engulfing the world. And he says that the President of Brazil, we are expecting the President of Brazil as well, and the United States, who have also addressed the Assembly. And we'll wrap the day for you because this is quite an important gathering. Think about what is taking place across the globe right now, what is taking place in the Middle East, as well as, of course, what's taking place in Ukraine, also featuring prominently there. So Sherwin and Sophia standing by. But let's listen to what António Guterres had to say earlier on.
The war in Ukraine is spreading with no signs of letting up. Civilians are paying the price in rising death tolls and shattered lives and communities. It is time for a just peace based on the UN Charter, on international law, and on UN resolutions. Meanwhile, Gaza is a non-stop nightmare that threatens to take the entire region with it. Look no further than Lebanon. We should all be alarmed by the escalation. Lebanon is at the brink. The people of Lebanon, the people of Israel, and the people of the world cannot afford Lebanon to become another Gaza. Let's be clear. Nothing can justify the abhorrent acts of terror committed by Hamas on October 7th or the taking of hostages, both of which I have repeatedly condemned. And nothing can justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. The speed and scale of the The speed and scale of the killing and destruction in Gaza are unlike anything in my years as Secretary-General.
O planeta já não espera para cobrar da próxima geração.
The planet is no longer waiting to demand payment for the next generation and is fed up with unfulfilled climate agreements. It is tired of neglected carbon reduction targets and financial aid to poor countries that does not arrive. Denialism succumbs to evidence of global warming. 2024 is on track to be the hottest year in modern history. Hurricanes in the Caribbean, typhoons in Asia, droughts and floods in Africa, torrential rains in Europe leave a trail of death and destruction. In the south of Brazil, we had the biggest flood since 1941. The Amazon is experiencing the worst drought in 45 years. The forest fires have spread across the country and have already devoured 5 million hectares in August alone. My government does not outsource responsibility, nor does it abdicate its sovereignty. We have done already a lot, but we know that much more needs to be done.
I truly believe we're at another inflection point in world history. But the choices we make today will determine our future for decades to come. Will we stand behind the principles that unite us? Will we stand firm against aggression? Will we end the conflicts that are raging today? Will we take on global challenges like climate change, hunger, and disease? Will we plan now for the opportunities and risk of revolutionary new technologies? I want to talk today about each of these decisions and the actions, in my view, we must take. To start, each of us in this body has made a commitment to the principles of the UN Charter to stand up against aggression. When Russia invaded Ukraine, we could have stood by and merely protested. But Vice President Harris and I understood that that was an assault on everything this institution was supposed to stand for.
All right, we're joined now by SABC News International Editor Sophie Mokoena, as well as SABC News correspondent in New York, Sharon Rice-Pease, for a discussion on the UN General Assembly. And Sophie, of course, listening to President Joe Biden earlier, he says that many see the world through the lens of difficulties, looking at the Ukraine conflict, the Middle East, etc. But he says he doesn't. He says all he sees is that there's hope and that there is a way forward. What else has he said?
Well, I think his focus was around what his country was doing in terms of assisting or intervening in these issues. But other people would say that whatever he said today, there are those who hold a different view in relation to the war in Ukraine, how he's going about in relation to the Middle East, and also just issues around the continent. And therefore, I think much as he did try to ensure that he's able to put across the country's position on these big global issues that are currently holding the globe back in terms of development and rebuilding of the economy since COVID-19, I find that maybe other people are going to say, but your country contributed to all these miseries.
And of course, Sharon, as we speak about the continent, there is a pledge from the US to help the continent fight Mpox, as well as sending through some vaccines as well.
Yeah, as a continent, and South Africa as a country is looking for what might pertain to, the region it finds itself in. Certainly, the pledge by the president, the outgoing president of the United States, to donate some 1 million Mpox vaccines to the African continent, and an additional pledge, Bongiwe, of some $500 million in that regard will certainly be one of the big takeaways. But just sort of the overarching message, right? The big takeaway from Biden is, of course, his last speech to the General Assembly, his fourth and final. He also used the long arc of his career, right? This is a person that has served in public service since being a senator at the age of 29. He was the vice president to Barack Obama. He became the president of the United States. And using that over 50 years in public service to really show what was possible. He talked about speaking out against apartheid. He talked about being the vice president in the Obama administration when they took out Osama bin Laden, who was responsible for the 9/11 attacks. He also talked about the largest investment that any administration in the United States had made towards mitigating climate change. So he showed that, what was possible in terms of a world that sometimes doesn't feel it can meet the moment in terms of the challenges it faces. And so he used his career in public service to really echo sentiments that nothing seems impossible until it's done. And that, of course, was a quote from former President Nelson Mandela. So the takeaway from Biden is that not everything is lost if we observe the tenets of the UN Charter, if we observe the pillars of democracy. And I think that was kind of the broad takeaway, using his long history in government as an example of what might be possible.
And Sophie, of course, President Cyril Ramaphosa expected to speak as well. What is he likely to touch on?
I think in line with the theme of the gathering, he is going to weigh in particularly on peace and security. You know that I think Sharon will agree that South Africa at the multilateral level did try to ensure that they intervene in situations such as the Ukraine war. You know that the president led that African peace mission. You know that on the Middle East, South Africa took this matter to the International Criminal Court and also to the International Court of Justice. On the continent, South Africa has been involved in the DRC. South Africa was involved in Mozambique, where you have the problem of the insurgents. But I think also he is going to talk about a moment where leaders of the world must work together to address pressing challenges, particularly pertaining to ordinary citizens of the globe.
And of course, Sherwin, at the same time, there is that all-important push to have new permanent seats for the African continent as well, something that Sophie and myself, as well as Hopewell Chinono, were talking about yesterday. But let's talk about the process that is likely to unfold should this actually go ahead.
Well, there's a process called the intergovernmental negotiations, these long-standing negotiations, and I put negotiations in inverted commas because, as we heard from the US ambassador when she announced their support for 2 African seats, she said there's only been a conversation that's been happening and there hasn't really been a fully-fledged negotiation process, a text-based negotiation process that still needs to unfold. So we are years away from a new formulation for a revamped and reformed UN Security Council. It's likely to be enlarged from 15 to maybe 20 plus members. There are likely to be many more permanent members, but as the USA has been very clear, without the veto. So that's probably something we need to watch very closely in terms of what President Cyril Ramaphosa will talk about. He will emphasize Africa's long wait for this reform process to take effect, and he will point to the chaos that we are seeing in different parts of the world and why there is a great deal of momentum required to meet the challenges that are necessary for an international architecture to be reformed, for the financial architecture to be reformed in terms of the development agenda. The SDGs are lagging not only because there's no will, but because there's no money. And so he'll point to the Pact of the Future that was just adopted at the Summit of the Future, which I think undergirds some of the reform processes that people like Cyril Ramaphosa will hope to see in the months and years ahead.
And before I move to Sophie, Sherwin, you touch on the issue of SDGs and the fact that right now we still don't have as many, women speakers, if I can even put it that way. The gender imbalance is still very, very clear on the speakers list tonight. And that speaks, of course, to this issue that they also need to work towards to ensure that there's transformation in that particular area as well.
There was a great deal of momentum around the world in terms of Goal 5 of the SDGs, which is women's empowerment and gender equality. And then COVID-19 hit us with a bang. And having reported from South Africa, just how gender-based violence shot through the roof, not only in South Africa, but around the world. You look around the room at the United Nations General Assembly, there are a lot of suits and not enough dresses. And I'm not saying that women don't wear suits, Bongiwe, but the point I'm making is there's more men in the room. The SG spoke in his speech about how only 10% of the leaders in the room will be women who are going to make statements during this general debate. So we've seen a regression here. We've seen patriarchy make a big push. We are seeing it play itself out in terms of the United States election here. And so a real indictment on world leaders that, gender equality is something that has been front and center at the United Nations now for a very long time. We had a former deputy president from South Africa, was the head of UN Women for 8 years, Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka. Front and center was the issue of really transforming the quota system in terms of women. And we are time and time again just not seeing, that becomes sustainable. And so a huge issue grappling with, just one example of how we're lagging in terms of implementing the SDGs, Bongiwe.
And it's something that Sophie and I have had extensive conversation in, especially, Sophie, when you even look at here on the continent, you look at across the globe, and this is an issue that continues to be recurring.
Yes, indeed. As you look at Africa, you only have one female president with executive powers. You have another president in Ethiopia, but she is ceremonial. We are hoping that something will change in the region, the SADC region. As you know, that Namibia will be going to elections, and SWAPO has put forward a woman. And the question is, what kind of resources are given to women to be able to challenge the highest office in their respective countries? And therefore, that is another important issue where perhaps many people must try to unpack or look at. But the reality is, it is a problem on the continent.
And Sophie, staying with you, that the issue of climate change has been quite a big one as well, and listening to President Lula as well, bringing it up, saying that it cannot continue to just be talk. And various speakers as well are saying that there needs to be an accelerated approach, given the fact that some of the countries are in fact continuing to be battered by the impact of climate change, and certainly an urgent situation is unfolding, but there's very little when it comes to moving towards solutions.
Something that the president of Brazil touched on, that his passion is around the issue of climate change. And as a host of the coming G20 summit, he is already kind of giving a direction in terms of how the world must handle this matter, and particularly the developed countries, because the G20 are your industrialized countries, and also South Africa being part of that. You had the President of the United States of America, Joe Biden, talking about what the G7 is doing. That would include the European Union. But the issue here that has been a bone of contention has been, much as these developed countries are making these resources available, the developing countries and poorer countries are saying, you industrialized, using our resources, using coal, you are well developed. Therefore, you can't rush us, because we are not at a point where we can say we are at the same par with you. And therefore, the issue of clean energy and addressing climate change, it must be a just process. You don't want a situation where one day the whole country is in the dark because there's no power, because that will affect the economy, and that will lead to unemployment, and that will lead to restlessness in terms of societies and ordinary people. But secondly, when you give us these resources, the fund, this fund, it must be mainly, or a chunk must be grants, not loans. Because already these developing countries and poorer countries are struggling to pay IMF and World Bank. They are indebted. And therefore, you have to be very careful.
And of course, you know, something that, in fact, outgoing President Joe Biden touching on there even earlier on, speaking about this issue of fossil fuels. But, you know, there's something else, of course, that Sherwin, you and I ended off with yesterday, and we were still speculating then, but now there's certainty. That meeting between President Cyril Ramaphosa and Elon Musk, let's talk more about that.
I mean, I wish I could give you a little bit more insider track in terms of the discussion. They wouldn't let us in the room, Bongi. We tried to beat down the door. They wouldn't let us in. He had his own security. They were negotiating. They eventually decided that no outside press would be allowed in. So we got the spray at the beginning, and then from GCIS, and then, of course, that was it. He snuck out of a back door while I was waiting for him at the front door of the hotel. So Sherwin didn't meet Elon Musk, but my takeaway from that discussion, having talked to the presidency afterwards, is that everything went well. They talked about Elon Musk's very broad portfolio. You'll know that he is the owner of Starlink. He's also the owner of SpaceX. He's also the owner of Tesla. He's also the owner of social media company X. And so they talked about the broad portfolio that is Elon Musk, and kind of finding a common ground in terms of what could happen in the future. But remember, this is an ongoing discussion. This was the first face-to-face meeting between President Cyril Ramaphosa and Elon Musk, and I'm told that those conversations will continue. What Elon Musk will do, we don't know. I saw him tweet earlier that it was good to meet President Ramaphosa, but we don't have granular details as to whether Starlink will be available in South Africa soon, and if Tesla is in fact going to make a big investment in South Africa. It would be very welcome. That's certainly a push from the South African government and the president in particular. But nothing to confirm at this point, Bongiwe.
And here I was hoping you were invited for tea and scones, so you can give us a little bit more information. But Sophie, of course, this is, you know, as we talk about investment, the president has been talking about electric cars. He's been talking about, you know, investment drives. And this doesn't come as a surprise, this particular meeting.
Yes, as I pointed out yesterday, that when he was addressing the SADC think tank, just before elections, he spoke about this American billionaire that he is talking to in relation with electric cars and batteries. And at that moment, I knew very well that he was talking about Elon Musk. He repeated this a few days ago when he was engaging editors in South Africa. But also, you can see that Elon Musk wants to move into the SADC region, because the SADC region has got the minerals that has powered him to be this powerful force globally in terms of wealth, because you have all these minerals in DRC, DRC being part of SADC. You have them in Tanzania. You have them in Namibia, hydrogen. You have them in South Africa. And therefore, you can see that he's looking to this region because of, if he is able to pull it, there's no need to import the resources to build his empire in terms of what he is doing in a different continent. But secondly, also met the president of Namibia talking about the same issues, particularly the satellite. And also he spoke to the Prime Minister of Lesotho yesterday about those issues related to technology. And Lesotho with America, you know that Donald Trump had a company that was selling jeans. He used to import jeans from Lesotho. And therefore, the relationship into this region and AGOA, I think big business who are part of these countries, who are part of AGOA, they can still do better in terms of doing business with the SADC region.
All right, we'll continue then to monitor the developments on the 79th session of the UN General Assembly.